Greetings, this is Griff Ruby, the Nostalgic Catholic, with yet another Isaac Asimov short story review. Well, this issue of Boy's Life magazine from October 1965. Look at that futuristic car. I'm sorry I have to cover this up. That's somebody's address. I don't think it's right to show that. Look at this beautiful futuristic car. They talked about the new age of exploration. Oh, look at these things. There's space vehicles, our future under the sea. Somebody made a projection as to what life in 1990 will look like. Cars of the future. The Man Who Made the 21st Century is the title of the Asimov story in here, though it doesn't say. But it does mean special features by Isaac Asimov, Pearl S. Buck, John Glenn, and Jacques Picard. Jacques Picard, right? Kind of a immediate predecessor of the much more famous Jacques Cousteau, who did a lot of television programs about under the sea and all, the life under the sea, and he had all these fascinating things. I remember as a kid watching the show, and every time it came on, I watched it. Loved Jacques Cousteau, but at any rate. So we have in here, let's start with a little bit from the table of contents. We get right up front with the fiction here, The Man Who Made the 21st Century, Isaac Asimov. It does, however, also introduce the writers. And look at that, he has a little squib about Isaac Asimov. And it says of him that then things really become fantastic as top science fiction author Isaac Asimov zooms along with The Man Who Made the 21st Century, a really way out tale of wild and wonderful things. Well, I guess that it is. Now this magazine really deserves to be some kind of a time capsule because it just captures so awesomely the sheer hubris that existed in the middle 1960s. Technology had been growing at this exponential pace, and it was just thought this could just go on forever. This could just go on, and everything could be wildly different, even just by 1990, let alone 2000. That was a big number, way off in the future. Well, let's go a little bit beyond 2001. Middle 1960s gave us a movie 2001 that figured you could just take a passenger flight to the moon, that you could have big rotating space stations that are, in operation at that time. Passenger flight, in the 50s it was all like propeller airplanes, but in the 60s the jet engines came out. It was a big deal to be able to ride on a DC-8 or a 707 in the 1960s when jet engines for passenger flight were just coming out. And we all kind of knew, quote unquote, that we were going to come into the, by somewhere maybe 10, 15 years in the future, people flying will be going supersonic. And, well, okay, the Concorde did come out around 15-ish, 20-ish years down the pike. As we saw, it turned out to be very expensive, and very few people actually got to ride the thing. So, because we started running up against limitations, supersonic flight, suddenly they realized, realistically, you can only have that over the oceans, because if you're over landed areas, you get sonic booms, and people don't like sonic booms. I don't know. They're kind of spooky, I guess. So, but there are other things. Cars. The article about cars was written at a time when Chrysler still had their 50 gas turbine engine cars out for being test marketed. They would recall them back and dismantle all but maybe 10, and I think eventually even less than that. I think only one or two actually survive now, intact. I believe Jay Leno, he's got a web page about cars, and he actually has that car, which is amazing. He talks about it. It's really neat. But they don't. The rest were all taken apart and dismantled to examine how the wear and tear on the engines and things like that took place. Bottom line, all that whole thing. Chrysler, having done that, said, "No, we're not going to do this." But at the time when they were being test marketed, this was the wave of the future. We're going to have gas turbine cars zipping down the highway at 180 miles an hour. Oh, we were gonna have there were all kinds of things. We're gonna have hover cars, use air cushions, so no wheels or anything, just zoom, not to mention how, of course, how easily out of control hovercraft tend to be. I mean, they'll just kind of go anywhere. You really gotta have some. Well, that just didn't prove very realistic, and there was a lot wrong with it, and it uses a lot of energy, and oh, we're going to have magnetic levitation trains. We were going to, oh yeah, if you just go to Tomorrowland, to Disneyland, here's the future. Here's what the house of the future is going to look like. And they had this, I think it looks like a mushroom more than anything else. But I mean, all this stuff, Buckminster Fuller. This was an era where everything was just going towards this extreme, radical future that was going to be so wonderful. And this captures that time. We were going to have cities under the sea. I can still remember one of my favorite Jacques Cousteau episodes. He was talking about how they would live under the sea, and they had this little house, and you could, the pressure inside matched the water pressure, so you could just go out the door that was in your floor, and you just go swimming out, and whatever. It was really great. They had to breathe helium instead of nitrogen, with oxygen. The heliox combination. They sound like Donald Duck or really high pitch all the time because they're using helium all the time. But what of it? You get used to that, I guess. And just all this stuff. And we're gonna have this grand and glorious thing. We're gonna be going to space. We're gonna have fast this and super smart that, and cars will be flying around. And of course, the ultimate glimpse of this hubris of grand and glorious technological future, you had the Jetsons, So, yeah, certainly in another 100 years, we'll all be like living in the Jetsons. You kind of have to look back on that. We look back and laugh. But as a kid, I was caught up in it. This was awesome. I just thought this was the greatest thing in the world. And Isaac Asimov, he got kind of caught up in it too a little bit. But let's talk about the Asimov article here specifically. Alright, this has a piece of artwork here. See this guy kind of flying around in some sort of airplane, hand-powered airplane or something. Okay, so that's illustrated by J. Wolfgang, whoever that is. Okay. And there's a couple other guys flying. There's one over there, and there's another one over here flying around. This does come up in the story, believe it or not. So the man who made the 21st century, it has a squib here. It says, "This is the fictional biography of a genius, a titan such as Da Vinci and Galileo." I don't know that they were exactly great, titans in the sense that this guy is, but okay. So, I don't know. Well, I'm going to read some bits of it, but the story is just too long to do the whole thing. So, it starts off with, "It doesn't matter where we are today. For all of us, it is a special day. Whether we are in a hospital in Canada, in Luna City in the crater of Alphonsus, or before the Museum of Visual Arts as it opens its doors for the first time, today has a particular meaning. It is October 21, 2065 today, exactly 100 years to the day since Richard Anthony Hartnett was born in Leona, New Jersey. How different the world was then as compared with what it is now. So different, it is hard to imagine what it must have been like to grow up in the 20th century." He makes it sound like, yeah, think what it was like in 18, when people grew up with a horse and buggy and, and there wasn't any telephone or anything like that. The only long distance communication besides mailing a letter or even the Pony Express, if you don't mind hiring a guy to ride that horse all across the country, would be the telegraph. That was a big deal in those old days. Okay. So let's see here. The people in the world of 1965 were split up into separate factions. Many of them were at odds with their neighbors. The atom bomb had already been invented, of course, and there was the constant threat of a war that might take place in which nuclear power would be used for total destruction. Oh, goodness, we still think of that now. It kind of went away for a while. I mean, not that bombs went away. We just kind of seemed like we were going to be more peaceful. Well, here's hoping. Okay. Anyway, so they're looking at. It's telling about this. This is a snapshot of 1965. Again, a time of a lot of promise, but not much really. I mean, actually, a lot of things had been achieved. You got to get with that, and it just looked like so very, very, very much more would be achieved in the lifetime of somebody born in 1965. By the time you're 100 years old, if you've lived so long, you ought to be able to live in a very, very awesome world. Take a trip to the moon. Or maybe even be stationed on a Martian colony or something. Okay. So, what is the story of Richard Hartnett, however? Oh, it turns out he has written a biography. He calls it My 20th Century. Okay, so he starts with 1980. He was just this ordinary kid. Apparently, the only thing he did was built his very own internal combustion engine and drove a small motor scooter about town for weeks before he was stopped in the ground that he wasn't old enough for a license. And except for this and a few other incidents, which are not described, sadly, he went through youth without extraordinary events and was a B student. So he didn't start off terribly unusual looking, other than this bit would be building his own car. So, but what kind of got him started here was the sight of the university microcomputer during his junior year at Columbia University. Yeah, Asimov went there in 1984. Columbia's microcomputer had been the first to make use of pseudocells as switching devices, and was thus the first true desk model capable of competing with the huge computers of the previous quarter century. Now, that's not too bad, actually. The computers do miniaturize, and in the 80s, you could get a portable VAX smaller than a washing machine. I'll give you that. Yeah. So desktop is kind of an exaggeration, unless you just want a simple-minded calculator. Then yeah, you could definitely do that. He asked the technician to describe what the microcomputer was doing, and he was told that it was analyzing next year's economic trends. Hartnett said, well, they must be a darn sight smarter than we are. And the technician was inspired to answer, no, it isn't. It's just quicker. It's just quicker, and we tell it what to do. It's an idiot without us. Can't do a thing. So Hartnett did not return to class that day. In his book, he says, I spent the day in my room. We tell it what to do, I kept thinking. And what tells us what to do? Each of us has a microcomputer in his head, which we call a brain. No one tells it what to do. It tells itself. How? Then was the first devouring idea. Let me jump to page 66. Devouring interest of Hartnett's adult life. Apparently he gets very interested in brain stuff. Okay, so he made the turning point then and there. He began studying mathematics, a subject which he had barely been interested before, and in his senior years, he dropped his previous major, which had been English literature, and plotted a course that would take him through mathematics and physics, arranging also for special tutoring in neuroanatomy and neurophysiology. So he's really getting into this here. He was a new man, for suddenly, without seeming effort, he began to master the most abstruse aspects of the subjects he studied. Once again, he had a flash of intense interest, as when he built his own motor scooter 10 years earlier, but now the flash persisted and grew unbearably brilliant. He went into graduate work, and by 1987, he was deep in work on his PhD thesis. No professor could truly sponsor him, for no professor could completely understand what he was doing. Well, he just does this stuff on his own like a basement tinkerer. Okay, well, we know now, of course, what it was. He was tackling the electroencephalographic pattern of the brain, the brainwaves. They had been discovered in the 1920s. He analyzed it. I'm kind of, summarizing here. Painstakingly involved a program whereby Columbia's microcomputer could do the analysis itself, following the instructions that he gave it. I had made up my mind that I would tell that computer what to do. He used himself as the experimental subject. Electrodes were fitted on the two different. For the first time, men could study the pattern of behavior in detail of each section of the brain separately. So basically, he finally figured out some program that could look at the brainwaves and analyze from that. Okay. Well, let's see here. Mental illness could be explained in terms of the malfunction of one portion of the brain or another, and the manner in which it malfunctioned could be spotted in neat mathematical terms. Tendencies towards such illness could be detected in earliest childhood. Treatment could be followed day by day with precision. Psychiatry became a science. I think you got an exact or hard science for the first time. Then there was more. Men who studied languages and communication were able to study it in connection with the responses of the brain. It became possible to translate from one language to another with unparalleled accuracy. Well, we actually are getting. You got programs that are actually getting fairly good at that, and they don't have to go into all the brainwave stuff. So, okay, whatever. So it's possible to argue that the World Federated Government proved a success only because men could understand each other effectively as the study of the brain progressed. Social dynamics became possible. Brotherhood became a condition of social health and not just an idealistic dream. Yeah, he kind of fell in for this, one world government dream or something that's not realistic, and not because of these things. Lack of communication doesn't make everybody brothers. It just makes everybody understand what they disagree with everybody else about. I hate to say that, but that's what it is. Okay, so Hartnett used to say he grew so interested in light effects. Now, this is an interesting thing. In The Robots of Dawn, where Elijah Bailey goes to Aurora, which I guess orbits Sirius, I'm not sure. The main and first world of the Spacers. He meets up, again, with this lady that he'd met up with on Solaria, Gladia Delmarre. And she has decided to devote herself to become a kind of an artiste with what she calls light sculpture. Turns out this light sculpture has its origins in this story. Okay, let's see here. He's trying to interpret visuals. He's trying to create a Hartnett projector capable of producing 3 dozen color forms with standardized color shifts that make up the Hartnett figures. This was kind of still tied to his psychological pursuits, but he begins to realize I can make some really nice designs with this stuff. Hartnett took the first step towards phototherapy, the slow and careful alteration of the brain pattern by means of controlled light sensations. There are some who worry about the use of this technique as a new kind of brainwashing and the danger of what does exist. So far, however, society has been enlightened enough to use phototherapy only for the healing of the sick. Oh, how naive and trusting. He bumps into that. He bumped into that way back at the weapon too dreadful to use. Oh, yeah. Okay, you promised us peace. We'll throw away our weapon into the sun. So the same kind of naivety. There are many who will say the true importance of this field lies not in what it has done for the mentally ill, but what it has done for all the world. It has brought a new art. Here we go. A new form of beauty to the world. These days, it is hard to remember that even as recently as 2000, the year 2000, oh, those were the good old days, right? There was no home in the world, not even the most palatial, that possessed a corner in which a piece of light sculpture gleamed in ever-changing beauty. But today, in honor of Hartnett, the Museum of Visual Arts is opening its doors in Chicago. It is devoted entirely to light sculpture. And by 2000, Hartnett was undoubtedly the best-known scientist in the world. Okay, so I guess we moved on. But visual sculpture, they just kind of sit there glowing out in different dramatic ways. So I guess he predated Gladia Delmarre by quite a time here. All right, 2000, let's see here. He was already the best-known scientist in the world. His work on the brain brought important consequences in other fields. He contributed to mathematical theory, to electrochemistry, even the theory of antiparticles. Maybe he helped develop the positronic brains. I don't know. Okay. So his oddest advance came in connection with his trip to the moon in 2009. Yeah, of course he'll be taking passenger trips to the moon by that time. It was his only venture into space. In the late 20th century and early 21st, it was still rare, but any but a chosen few to go to the moon, and Hartnett was a bit too old to withstand the crude accelerations of those early days without some danger. Furthermore, he'd recently married. I never had time for it before, he said, and Mrs. Hartnett was opposed to his leaving. Oh, yeah, okay. Nevertheless, he made up his mind, and he was important enough to have his way. In reaching the moon, he succeeded eventually in placing the Hartnett touch on it. In those early days of lunar exploration, the greater danger lay in the moon's low gravity. It felt wonderful while one was there, and there were no complaints until the return journey to Earth. Exposure to low gravity for weeks at a time weakened muscle and altered bone structure. Readjustments to Earth's gravity was difficult, and in 1993, when astronaut John Stacy died on his return to Earth, killed by the high G acceleration his weakened body could no longer endure, it was decided that something had to be done. Beginning in 1995, yeah, we all remember 1995, large centrifuges were set up on the moon. I missed that. And lunar explorers were expected to exercise in them for 2 hours each day in order to maintain their body tone. It was tedious and unpleasant, but it made it possible to remain on the moon for months at a time without harmful effects. So now we're coming up to something I introduced this with. Hartnett was on the moon for 2 months and grew desperately tired of the centrifuge. After a while, he explains in his autobiography, I felt there was no point in my having the kind of brain I was credited with having if I couldn't use it to think my way out of the centrifuge. I didn't, but I thought of future visitors to the moon out of it. Hartnett suggested that a large cavern be hollowed out well beneath the moon's surface and that it be filled with air somewhat more highly compressed than was the Earth's natural atmosphere. This made one of the long-standing dreams of mankind come true. On Earth, it is impossible to fly with wings strapped to the arms because gravity is too strong and the air is too thin. On the moon, though, where gravity is low and where the air in the cavern is thick, men could soar effortlessly on wings of ribbed plastic. This was our drawing, see. Indeed, with wings of proper design and with proper practice, men could literally fly like the birds. The cavern was built and astronauts took to flying. The muscular effort involved and the inertial effects of swooping and changing course kept bones and muscles strong and healthy. And it was fun. It has never been possible to restrict men on the moon to a mere 2 hours of flying a day. It is sometimes impossible to get them out of the chamber and onto their feet for 2 hours together. Now that trips to the moon are rather common, no tourist would dream of not learning how to fly. Elaborate Hartnett chambers now exist on the moon, 7 of them right now, and they are the greatest tourist attraction on the satellite. So it turned out that Hartnett has not only invented a new science and a new art form, but also a new sport as well. Hartnett was once asked how he's gotten the idea for the chamber. With characteristic honesty, he said, I never did. I read about something like it in a science fiction story by R.A. Heinlein, written before I was born. That's the problem. I'm not truly vastly read the fiction out of science fiction. It'd be nice to know where that came from. So, he was always interested in science fiction. Brings it home to roost here. and perhaps it was the incident on the moon that turned into actual writing of it. Then, too, a son was born to them in 2012 and a daughter in 2015. I was an old father, he said, and I was afraid of dying before my children were grown. I wanted to leave something personal behind. He decided on science fiction, and his long-dormant major in English literature finally had his chance. For 10 years, he turned out a novel every other year and about a dozen or so shorter pieces using his own name. Perhaps they were not the greatest science fiction stories ever written, but they were quite good according to critics in the field, and would have carried their weight even without his name on it. His best-known book, Flight to Arcturus, was made into a film in 2025. Hey, I can't wait for it to come out. Hartnett attended the premiere and was questioned afterwards with a rather gentle embarrassment. Well, it's not quite as I wrote it. Movies never are. It was not, according to the reviewers, a very good film. However, it was what was important. Flight to Arcturus is that it marked the beginning of Hartnett's final preoccupation, his possibility of interstellar flight. So, he carries on more about that. In science fiction, they'd have this sort of thing. Inertialess drives, hyperspatial jumps, and since the time of E. Smith and I. Asimov, maybe we can make it real. When Hartnett died on August 16, 2047, so he didn't make it to 100, okay, he had still not made it real, but he never stopped trying. He had made the 21st century real, though. He gave it its science of the mind, he gave it a practical world government, and the study of social dynamics through the science of the mind. He gave us the art of light sculpture. He gave us the sport of lunar flights. He gave us gadgets and books, and he never found any end to accomplishment. In a letter wrote to a 15-year-old correspondent just a few months before his death, he said, "Dear Stephen, no, I haven't done it all. I haven't even begun to do what there is to do. It's been over half a century since I began to analyze brainwaves, and no one yet has been able to work out a way of transmitting thoughts directly from mind to mind. Someone will have to work out a practical system of telepathy someday. It hasn't been done yet. We reach the Earth's mantle, but it is only a pinprick. Someday we must learn how to investigate the Earth all the way down to its center. We must construct true robots to do men's routine physical labor more efficiently than ordinary machines can. We must learn to control the gravitational force and turn it to our use, so that we won't have to fight it every time we take a step into space. We must find some way of reaching the stars, where we may find other civilizations like ours, and we must be free to understand intelligent creatures who are not human beings. There's so much to be done, and perhaps you will do some of it." Bit of encouragement. Remember, we're looking at boys' life, right? Meant for Boy Scouts. Give them some thoughts about the future and what to do with their lives. So, that was Richard Anthony Hartnett. Out of so many discoveries, he returned at the end to the greatest discovery he had ever made, when he had first come to realize that there were horizons to be reached for, unlimited horizons that would stay unlimited forever, no matter how far mankind advanced. So, he captured that hubris pretty well. But you also see he, in that story, he's trying to lay out, you're a kid, you're getting this magazine. Maybe you could do the same thing, kid. Do all these great things. Study science, study math, try to think of different things, ask questions, look for ideas. Yeah, those are good things. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with any of that. You can just, in fact, I think that's really great. I think this is kind of an overlooked gem, because this story, sadly, has never been reprinted anywhere. It exists in this old magazine alone. I categorize this, therefore, as an Isaac Asimov rarity, which it properly is, and it's also why I felt I had to give it in such detail, since it seems rather unlikely that the average person viewing this is going to have an opportunity to encounter the full text. But at least you should have a pretty good idea of what's going in there. That's what I've got for that. Thanks for listening.